Hello, everyone, and welcome to the kickoff for the 2022 Data Resilience SpectrumCast. We got the whole gang back with us again this year. Hey, everyone. Hey, Randy. Hey, Sean. Hey, Tricia. How you all doing?
Good. Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year. Very good. All right. And with this kickoff inaugural podcast, we thought we'd talk about the release schedules of software, given IBM is going to be releasing some new software for its data protection portfolio. But let's just kick it off. We have moved to a quarterly release cycle. And with that comes some pros and some cons. And I think we want to talk a little bit about that. But what's going to happen is every quarter, IBM is going to have a release of its upcoming new capabilities within its software. And Randy, why don't you start us off? You said you had some thoughts about kind of the value proposition around this quarterly code release.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting, although not unique to us, certainly lots of other organizations that are in kind of agile development and CI/CD pipeline, use cases and workflows are shifting to this more frequent release cadence. And there's some interesting, like you said, pros and cons and a lot of analysis that goes into making this kind of a shift. Now for, an organization the size of IBM and the number of software products we have and the size of our development operation, this is obviously a non-trivial, exercise in making that kind of a shift. So I was just I was poking around a little bit, and I came across a couple of articles that I thought were kind of interesting that highlighted sort of the pros and cons and kind of the, point counterpoint on some of the aspects of this more frequent release schedule. So the first one is from GitLab, and it talks about how they kind of shifted from a yearly or a semi-annual release to actually a monthly release. So they're doing it even more frequently than we are. And it just kind of walks through some of the good things about it and also some of the challenges, right? The fact that it puts a lot of pressure on delivery and, sticking to the plan. It creates sometimes some cultural, and morale issues with the development teams because they're pushing towards these, much more aggressive schedules. But on the plus side, it provides higher levels of customer engagement and satisfaction because as problems or bugs or enhancements are made available or become identified, they can be mitigated much faster. So I thought this was interesting because it viewed it sort of from the cultural and the workflow perspective. And then I found another one, this company called StarRes, which is apparently a big global web-based real estate management kind of company. I don't fully understand their business model, but anyway, that's not the point. So this guy's an architect in their dev team, and he went through and did sort of a mathematical analysis on how you identify bugs and problems and introduce fixes and track changes, but how that can actually reduce the probability of bugs occurring with a more frequent release cycle. And I won't go through all the math here. We can include the links to the articles here, but he goes through kind of an interesting mathematical model that looks at how potential changes or fixes in code can result in downstream changes or breaking other parts of the code, and how as you have more fixes occurring simultaneously, the statistical probability compounds for those bugs to occur. So therefore, if you kind of look at the math, you end up with significantly more opportunities for bugs to occur with a longer release cycle than you do with a shorter release cycle. So this I thought was kind of two interesting sides of the coin. One looking at it from the human resource side and kind of the cultural elements, the workflow, the organizational impact of pivoting to a more frequent release schedule. And this one looks at it in a more empirical way and kind of breaks down the mathematics around, probabilities for failure and how they can compound if you stretch out your release cycle. So I don't know. I just thought these were kind of interesting because they viewed the release cycle in a general sense from both kind of an organic perspective as well as a more empirical and scientific perspective. And I'm sure when we made this change, we no doubt, paid consultants millions of dollars to come tell us that.
Well, like I see when I'm working with development to create these YouTube videos is a lot of times those functions and features are ready way before GA when we were on that 6-month cycle.
Yeah.
So by having this 3-month cycle, we'll have these pieces that are ready, able to push out. And, you know, if you hit the case that, gee, we found a bug, we're not ready, it's not waiting another 6 months to push it out. So I really like that.
Mhm.
I mean, I do understand the customer feedback aspect of it, and the to me, the creativity aspect of it. Those are very important. But I guess I'll be the nattering nabob of negativism on this one. I mean, I've experienced some of the downsides of increasing these release cycles for these products. And one of the things I do see is feature functionality released in kind of a half-baked, not completely thought out state, right? Like rather than completely thinking out a feature, or even if a feature is completely thought out, it's like we have a schedule to meet, so we're only going to put out half of it for this release and leave the other half of it for the next release coming up. So it gets to be more of a meeting a metric thing than it is actually completely thinking out things and you know, producing a well-rounded piece of functionality for
sure.
software.
And yeah, it's definitely not without risk, and that's definitely one of the risks, is that there's a propensity to kind of force things out maybe ahead of their time or before they're fully baked and ready to go. So yeah, you know, it's never going to be kind of a perfect balancing act, I guess. And I think it also, to your point, to mitigate that, you've got to add capacity. You know, you need a lot more testing, you need faster testing, you need more instrumentation and tooling for automated testing and automated QA and, you know, code reviews and all that stuff. So it does require some pretty significant retooling of how you conduct the development workflow.
And I think we could beat this topic to death. I mean, there's a lot of good opinions about this. But Sean, one more thought. I want to ask you a question based on something you just said, which is, you know, I call it, this is my own personal kind of comment, right? I call it the Microsoft effect, right? Back in the day, you'd release Microsoft Word, you know, 4. Whatever, and it would have just what you said, right? It would have half the real number of features you probably really wanted, and would say, seems so simple, why didn't they just put it in? But over time, you slowly get feedback and priorities change and which feature is better and better and better, and they kind of keep adding them. So based on what you said, right, even though they might only half put something in, does that give the user community a feeling of, hey, these guys are executing, they're putting stuff in. Yeah, it's not great, but next month I might get a little bit more, I might get a little bit more. Or is it like, no, just do it right, put it in when it's done and send it to me, right?
Yeah, and I think Randy hit the key word there. It's balance, right? Because I mean, speaking of IBM's data protection solution, there was a time when we had a release every 2 years, right? And you'd hear constant complaining from the user base about, after the 2 years was up, a feature would come out and the user base would say, wait a minute, that's not what we asked for. Right? And they would kind of, you know, and so we were waiting for 2 years for the wrong thing.
We needed that 2 years ago. We don't need it anymore.
Right. Yeah. Or we don't need that. Right. So, you know, it's a balancing act, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And I think that truth differs for each kind of software. Like for instance, iOS on your iPhone, that's a once a year thing now. It's not an every quarter thing. It's a once a year thing. And I think that's because, or at least to me, an operating system is so critical, right? That they want to take the time to make sure those features are completely thought out, and holistic.
We don't want to beat this to death, but on that point, just quickly, it's a once a year major release, but they push point releases almost weekly, sometimes, especially following a major release. Yeah, so you know,
and occasionally they're bug fixes, and occasionally they're a little feature function that's not necessarily going to rock the boat terribly, right? Yeah.
Okay, and that brings me to my tooltip. Oops, backwards. Let's try that again. My tooltip for this
good catch
is that inside of Spectrum Protect, the Operations Center, you can easily see what version your clients or your servers are at. And this is important because as some of these new features come out, there might be a level of the code that you have to be at to be able to access that or to get it to work with other servers or clients. And inside of the Spectrum Protect Operations Center, you can set up to have the PTFs automatically pushed out and installed on existing clients. So that does exist out there for Spectrum Protect. And then Spectrum Protect Plus is really nice and easy in the fact that most of its agents automatically update. So you don't have to worry about that.
Great. No, that's a good tip, Tricia. Thank you. So speaking of moving into IBM solutions or just software solutions in general, around our data protection portfolio, we focus on four key components for this whole modernization college strategy. And I don't think we're any different than a lot of other folks that provide data resilient solutions within the industry, right? Our focus is around convergence, and a big part of that convergence is around simplicity. And I think that's a big thing everybody wants. We focus around cyber, obviously the number one topic in data resilience these days. Cloud, another key capability. And then containers, this up and coming kind of new way of building applications and, driven by cloud and cloud applications. So let's just take these kind of one at a time really quick and think about on the simplicity side, right? We've talked about there's over 100 data protection technologies in the industry. There's 100 different ways to do data protection, data resilience, right? Some of the things that you want to focus on is how do you reduce CapEx, and also how do you reduce OpEx? That's a big thing these days, right? And some of the things that we're doing in the portfolio are trying to bring the best of both worlds, Protect and Plus, together to give the user this really simplified, really, easy to use with the foundation of a 25-year-old backup product. And I don't say 25-year-old to say old, I say 25 years old to say, there isn't a corner case in data resilience that Protect hasn't hit yet. And we've got a huge breadth of expertise on how to address and solve some of these. So from a simplicity standpoint, I just like your guys' opinion, right? Are you guys seeing a lot of the same thing out there with how to make things easier and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and when I look at what's coming out and continue to come out this year and next year is this combination, like you spoke about, of Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus, being able to use the same container storage with our awesome solution. And that also addresses your CapEx when we talk about being able to dedupe the data that's being sent into those containers across both your Spectrum Protect and Spectrum Protect Plus workloads.
Well, and it seems like there's more of a convergence towards a common user experience, right? So as the individual products mature and get enhanced and evolve, they're also coming together to produce a more unified workflow, which I think is easier. I'm assuming is easier.
Hey, Randy, that brings up a really cool thing, and you get to see a bigger part of the overall portfolio from things like scale and cause and that sort of thing, which would lead to say, IBM, and we're not the only ones, right? But offering a suite of products in a software-defined fashion to provide that, we call it simplicity for customers to be able to kind of pick and choose the applications that they need, the infrastructure applications they need to support their business. Do you think there over time, and this won't happen tomorrow, so don't take that as gospel, but over time, do you see, like, from a management perspective, the management of those things becoming consistent to kind of ease that OpEx that you were just talking about?
Oh, no question about it. I mean, you're kind of already seeing it. If you look at, for example, our Fusion solution, one of the big value proposition elements of Fusion is that it's a unified management console and management view. So your entire infrastructure, the full stack from persistent data all the way up to and including, OpenShift-based and Kubernetes-based workloads and apps at the top, everything is managed from one place. Very simple, very linear workflows, search-based, great user experience, very simple visual representations of data and system topologies. So no question. If you look over on the Red Hat portfolio, you've got Advanced Cluster Manager, which is their converged view of their entire stack, right? So you're definitely seeing these unified management metaphors for these, sort of complex stack solutions. So absolutely. And I'd assume the same thing is happening in the Protect portfolio, I'm guessing.
And take that one step further, right? We've done some things within the portfolio, not just Protect and Plus, but other things that I know of, around supporting kind of third-party data management, data inspection applications like Prometheus and Grafana. Can you guys shed a little light on that?
Yeah, so our HSM for Windows was one of the first ones to be able to offload a lot of its statistics and data into these two applications and really give the end user great insight into how their HSM product is being used. So we've seen it already, and I know we're going to see more of that being integrated with the Protect portfolio.
Yeah, that's one of the big advantages of basing a lot of our foundational infrastructure across the portfolio on open standards-based solutions like OpenShift, right? Because now that gets you access to a huge ecosystem of visualization tools, data management tools, analytics tools, predictive metrics. So things like, Grafana and Prometheus and the like, you can bolt those right on, and you can consume data being produced by those environments and visualize it in very nice and very kind of useful and integrated ways. So yeah, I think we'll definitely see that continue to be a strong storyline.
And so if we continue down the data management path, one of the, last year we talked about the 6 key things for building a data resilient environment. And then the first thing was making sure you had the proper administrative privileges, which really talks about the administration, the management of your data and that sort of thing. As we move into this topic around cyber, one of the key things we'll be delivering across the portfolio, especially in the data resilience side of things, is this multi-factor authentication. And I have to believe, I mean, everything I sign up for these days says, also, in addition to your email and signing in and that's your login, et cetera, also give us your phone number so that we can do a multi-factor kind of combination. Sean, you got some thoughts on that?
It's interesting watching the industry and watching us, right? Because if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would have told you, if you want multi-factor authentication and all these other types of security features, you just go to a common LDAP or Active Directory management system for your data protection solution. And today, because of the breaches of those types of systems, Active Directory in particular, I'd actually give you the exact opposite advice, right? Don't use the common stack, set up your own. And that's kind of brought us to, in the Spectrum Protect world, supporting multi-factor authentication in our own product as opposed to relying on some other shared stack.
Yeah,
solution.
and you definitely see the proliferation of, whether it's a hardware tokenized, security key device of some kind or, an authentication app running on your phone. It's definitely very pervasive, which is good. I mean, it's kind of a pain sometimes, and it definitely adds a step to logging in and doing certain, prioritized or privileged workflows, but it certainly increases security. So I think people are generally pretty accepting of it at this point.
It's one of those things where now that it's so pervasive and you have to do it every time. I remember being in India when we were at Infinidat, Randy, and I was with Bala, and he did something, even at his ATM machine, he put in his card and had to wait from the ATM machine to send him a code to punch in addition to his own code. I thought, wow, this just seems like a lot of work, but I got to believe, right, from a security standpoint, even better, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Right, one of the other things we talked about was cloud, and if we set fundamentally the cloud kind of story, right, we're seeing a lot of applications move to the cloud. So take, I think the most common one, most everyone is familiar with, besides things like Box and that sort of thing, is a big enterprise application like email, right? So Microsoft's Outlook email moving to Microsoft 365 into the cloud, and these things still needing protection. And Google has its whole suite, and Microsoft has its whole suite of products. Salesforce has a suite of products, and so we're seeing more and more applications, especially the more modern applications, provide the ability to protect those things in the cloud. Tricia, do you have some thoughts on, if it's in the cloud, should they be protecting it? Where do we sit there?
So I always say the cloud is just somebody else's computer. So I believe you should be protecting that. If that's your data and that's critical to your system, then you better make sure that you have some control over how that's being protected. So yeah, I'm excited where we're going with cloud applications and cloud workload protection. That's big, and that's going to continue to get bigger.
Yeah, and despite the fact, and I was just looking at some market data actually yesterday, we're looking at market sizing for Fusion. And if you look at cloud and sort of managed services in the cloud, not surprisingly, backup, data protection, archive are still far and away the majority of kind of killer apps in the cloud by a huge margin. Like it's a very, very significant, leadership position there. So that suggests that, to your point, Tricia, there's a lot of data sitting out there that doesn't have clear-cut sovereignty or protection or security wrapped around it. And that's a huge exposure, not just to individual entities and companies, to government agencies, to entire chunks of the economy. So that's a big one.
I mean, I think the answer to your question, Steve, is if I'm in the cloud, should they do it for me? Yeah, sure, right? I mean, I don't want to do anything. I want to pay for one price and have them do it all. But the reality is the complexities around these requirements are such that even somebody of the scale of a cloud provider like a Microsoft or an Amazon can't do it all, right? So they have outsourced those requirements and those details to other vendors. Part of
Yeah,
which
what are
we're
you
taking
seeing,
up.
Steve?
Yeah, that's Sean. You bring up a really good point, and I think number one, the first thing I was going to say, but before Sean's comment, and I've got another response to that is, if you Google should I back up Microsoft Office in the cloud or cloud-based applications, the number one document that comes up is a Microsoft document saying yes, you should. Right? I mean, they'll do the data dispersal like we do with cause and that sort of thing to hopefully ensure things are there. But if you're thinking about, hey, I'm going to need this data for super fast recovery and that sort of thing, right? You're going to want to take control and have your own kind of arms around that world and know what it takes to be able to do that. As we say all the time, practice, 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 right? You're not going to practice a fake fail with Microsoft, right? They're keeping that running. They have hundreds of thousands of clients. They want to be able to keep that up and running, no problem. And Sean, you make a good point, right? You want to hope that they would offer that kind of thing. And some of these folks do offer some level of protection, but that's why you see more and more vendors providing their solution in these marketplaces, whether it be Azure Marketplace, AWS Marketplace, Google Marketplace, so that they can actually add that capability and functionality to the data that lives there. Right. And you can get that level of service from them. Mm-hmm. And Randy, you made a good point, right? Which is, a lot of these cloud applications, right? Whether it be a Microsoft application or one of the larger vendors' applications, in addition, clients all over the world are building applications in the cloud around this whole new containerized capability to be able to build applications better, stronger, faster, right? Which brings up the point, and we made a release about 2 years ago now to be able to support the backup of container applications. But we're doing more and more and more every release. And now that we have a quarterly release, it's going to be more and more and more to be able to support those types of backups for container applications.
We're definitely, and not only is the answer yes, but it's kind of like a really emphatic yes, because as containers are continuing to get adopted more aggressively in the enterprise, I mean, it's the fastest growing segment of the application delivery and kind of service delivery market worldwide. It's putting huge demand on data management and data protection, which is something that is lagging in terms of features and enterprise ready and hardened features for that environment, which is a big part of the reason why Fusion includes data protection and management as an absolutely foundational part of its capability, because we recognize that a lot of these large enterprises that are rolling out and trying to really exploit all the advantages of containerization, rapid development, continuous integration, open standards ecosystem, write once, run anywhere, portability, transparent data movement and elasticity, all those things are great. But if the underlying data is not fundamentally protected, secured, all the things you come to expect from an enterprise class workload environment, then it's going to slow the uptake. So, and that's really in no one's best interest. So we are keenly focused on the importance of data protection and resilience within that containerized microservices workflow environment. Absolutely.
And not just offering that protection inside of the cloud, so doing a snapshot or such inside of the cloud, but also being able to get it off the cloud so you have that copy in another environment.
Yeah. Absolutely. And do so seamlessly with end-to-end security at rest and in flight. IBM, as we talk about all the time, has been a thought leader in security for decades. And we're able to leverage a lot of that domain expertise in our solutions as well, which is a pretty significant differentiator.
Now, one topic. Oh, go ahead, Sean. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say not to get off topic too much, but have they? We've seen a lot of these cloud providers go down for extended periods of time over the last year or two, right, and cause huge outages. But I haven't really heard of any huge data loss scenarios. Does anybody here know if there have been any of those that have been publicly documented over the last couple of years? Where like I had, maybe that's a research topic for one of our future Spectrum casts.
I mean, there's typically, I suppose you could argue that any ransomware attack, if not properly mitigated, is a data loss event, right? But maybe that's a bad example. But yeah, that's an interesting question. It might be unavailable for a while, but it's not necessarily gone.
Usually it comes back, and usually it's not. It's not. The down scenarios are more a cloud-wide provider, like AWS gets hit, right? Whereas the ransomware tends to be, at least in my experience, an individual company or organization-based thing, not a they're attacking Microsoft or they're attacking IBM type of thing.
I think you're giving the hackers an idea, Sean. They're one of the big listeners of our podcast.
That's right.
Audience.
We got to be careful.
We have a lot of black hats listening to the podcast.
Statistics. Hacker views.
Just around this whole topic around containers, we think about who the consumer is of the data protection solution within an organization, right? Traditionally, it's always been a backup administrator, or depending on the size of the company, it's the storage administrator's responsibility to make sure that protection is happening. But over the course of the last few years, we've seen that completely evolve. And I'm assuming we're going to start to see even more evolution of that as we move forward in the container space. Would you guys agree on that?
Yeah, we saw that like with the virtual machine, we saw a big shift right there. And so I think now with the containerized, you'll see that additional shift.
It's just the natural evolution of things, right? As these technologies catch on, what happens is little pockets in the organization, shadow IT, if you want to call it that, start adopting them. And then they have some success and they become more important, right? Mm-hmm. And then as they become more important, they have to address these other issues that surround operation, like data backup, right? And so they're going to be making the decisions as to how to deploy data protection and all these other.
And as organizations are increasingly taking advantage of some of the simplicity and ease of implementation and management we've talked about, that also allows them to centralize and coalesce responsibilities into a smaller group of people in some cases. So you've got, Tricia, your point that the VM admin became kind of the all-powerful full stack, major domo. The same thing is starting to happen now with the Kubernetes administrator, right? So that person or group of people within the organization kind of centrally holds a lot of the power over that entire stack. So it is definitely a shift. For sure.
I think that brings us full circle, right? Because now if we're talking about more folks having the ability or the need, not just the ability, but the need to be able to take advantage and utilize data resilient solutions to ensure that their data is protected, it needs to be simple, right? Yeah. Because a lot of these folks don't have the training or the education, not sure there's so much on the education, but the training or the skills around data resilience, right? Theirs is more focused on, if I'm a container person, I'm building out containers, I'm building applications.
As it should be. If I'm provisioning a service or some, capacity on a system or an environment, I shouldn't care about how it's being protected. I should be able to go in the portal and say, I need this backed up once every hour. I need real-time, continuous data protection. I need archive, click the buttons, click provision, and then forget about it. I mean, that's really the way it should be.
Right. All right, team. Hey, great set of topics today. Any last words from anyone?
We're off to a roaring start.
We are off to a roaring start. All right, everyone. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.